Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you once again at PTV WORLD. In today's show, in the debate, we will be talking about two very important topics. One of them relates once again to India and the human rights violations and the situation over there, with particular reference, of course, to religious freedom, something that we see is being denied not only to Muslims, Christian and Sikhs, but every other minority in India. With particular reference to the situation of Muslims in India, we see that the violations continue to grow both in number and in intensity. We see that now and as even before, they are not allowed to practice even the basic fundamentals of their religion. And this kind of situation that is being created for them makes it even harder for them to exercise their right to exercise their religion. And this, of course, is a huge problem in the country when the kind of justifications we get are also quite ridiculous. In the latest developments, we see that the Haryana Chief Minister has spoken about open spaces being used for prayers, specifically Friday prayers by the Muslims, as something that will not be tolerated, something that is causing problems, security issues, traffic problems, the fact that street children cannot play outside, and that is the reason why fundamentally Muslims should not be allowed to practice their religion. And when you have these kind of justifications coming forward from a regime, then you can understand the kind of steps that they're taking and the intensity to which they have gone. But of course, the bigger question remains as to how these things are being tolerated both within India and outside of India, and what needs to be done about them, which is of course what we will be discussing in the show today. Furthermore, we will also be taking a look at the situation in Russia with reference to Ukraine, something we have discussed about in a previous show as well. In the latest development, we know that the US and Russia may seem to be moving towards a discussion. They want to go ahead with talks on how to resolve the issue, but we of course see that the situation is not as simple, with Putin pointing out different conditions as to what is required for things to move forward, with particular reference to NATO and its rolling back to what it used to be, and not having any sort of presence in the eastern side. And that puts into question a lot of the factors that can or cannot take place. Furthermore, the threat of US sanctions is there, even though Vladimir Putin says that they do not plan to invade Ukraine. Military action is not really off the table. What seems to be the future with regards to Russia and Ukraine, and whether or not these talks are going to take place, and if they do, can an agreement be possibly reached with the kind of expression that we see coming from the Russian president? That, of course, is the huge problem here that we need to be talking about. For all of these discussions, we have been joined once again in the studios by Mr. Farrukh Pitafi, as always, and Mr. Raja Faisal as well. And we will be joined by our respected guests online as well. For the first segment, with reference to the situation in India and the kind of intolerance that is that the Muslims in India are being subjected to, we have been joined by Shani Hamid, who is a UK-based journalist and a political analyst. Thank you very much, Shani, for being with us once again. Shani, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank
you
for
Shani, absolutely, it's our pleasure. Shani, when we talk about the situation in India, there are of course so many different questions that we have discussed. But when we talk about religious freedom, it is one of the most fundamental rights that need to be extended to all. And even the most basic ones, something which is really not causing anyone any problems, is also painted in a way that it is a hindrance to people's lives, and that those kind of justifications are accepted. That for me seems to be the bigger problem here, and not just the fact that they have an issue with Muslims practicing the religion, but that they can actually justify it. Do you think that the people in India at large also have the same sort of justifications of not letting somebody pray out in the open just because street children can't play cricket?
Thank you very much indeed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First, I would like to remind you all that a simple rule in trade, whomever controls the trade does control the money, and whomever controls the money does control the world. So So when it comes to religion, we have to remember that India is the third largest Muslim country, hosting all our Muslim brothers and sisters, and is having a lots of great majority when it comes to Muslims and religion differences in their part, depending on their agenda. So when it comes to that Muslim agenda, and if you see where India is being positioned today, and well surrounded with all the other Muslim countries, Indonesia, Pakistan, and all the Middle Eastern countries, India already is having a big problem about and worries about being derailed by the Muslims and Muslims' solidarity. So this is where they are coming from and trying to derail our Muslim brothers and sisters and to corrupt their agenda of solidarity. Because with the latest organization of Islamic cooperation and solidarity we're seeing today, India is already having a little bit of a panic about people's self-determination. So yes, Muslim unity of Muslim is a very great deal in India, and they wouldn't like to be derailed with the Muslim solidarity in India, as they are the third largest country which hosting home for the Muslim brothers and sisters. So this is where they are coming from, and this is why they are continuing with their genocide and human rights abuses towards derailing these wonderful people in the world.
Shani, what we saw in, I think, day before yesterday, there was this Sangat going on, or meeting going on of Haridwar Dharam Sangat. What they did was, they have been promoting hate, or the hate speeches were made. Then they were obviously, taking an oath from everyone who was present in that meeting, in which they asked everyone to obviously spread hate about Islam, then spread hate against the Muslims, and then obviously hate speech was targeted towards the Muslim, and then they promoted the targets, Muslims as the targets, and they said that they commit crimes against Muslims, and if you see their shops, vandalize them, if you see their mosques, vandalize them. It seems like nobody is there to stop them. And we saw on even on social media, everyone was obviously highlighting this and comparing it to the Hitler, the way Hitler used to take oaths from his own people to commit atrocities against Judaism in the previous century. Same is the case here in India. When would it stop, and why it is not stopping, and why nobody is highlighting these issues?
Because we lovely Muslim community and all the other religious representatives, we are just having a little problem in coming together. Because we have to remember, we need to just remember that we are one. There is one God, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadan Rasulullah. And there is one God and one unity. We got to get together. It's not about somebody else's agenda, that is not about the people's agenda, it's not about the people's chosen agenda. We have to just remember to unite. We have to remember the spirit of brotherhood, sisterhood, and unity. We have to remember being a human. We have to remember to work together. And if we just allow these people to corrupt us within, because of their trade agendas, because of their money control, and because of their trade control, bigger agendas, we will fail. We have to just get together and remember, go to basics, go back to basics, remember our brotherhood and sisterhood. Yes, we have to remember our good will of the religion, and the good about the Muslim religion or Islamophobia, why the world is very much worried about the Islamophobia, because they are worried about this jihad. Unity is about education, is about solidarity, is about brotherhood, sisterhood, goodwill. We love everybody. So let's just remember that. If we just remember that and move with this, we will just go ahead with our people's self-determination. And we will
Right,
just
but
remember
Shani,
about
I absolutely agree that what you're saying is, of course, very important and something that people should perhaps aspire to or do. But that really is not the situation at the moment. And maybe it's not that simple enough that for us to just say that this is something that needs to happen, because it's not happening. And maybe we need to do something different for that to happen. Farrukh, when we talk about these divides and what Shani was saying, that maybe the things like Islamophobia or when we see the other as different is based on fear, and that's what's sort of being used by the regime in India. How do we overcome that particular fear in the general public of whatever the other person is expressing or what they believe, what they want to practice? How do we inculcate, take that fear out?
Right, and that's a very good question. And let me start by complimenting everyone on the screen right now. I think everyone is that I'm talking to is actually looking very sharp today, especially the brother's tie, right? But regarding what is happening in India, look, as a long-time student of Faith of the World, and I've read Hinduism from cover to cover. Whatever I could get, I actually read it. I don't think that you actually can relate this only to the religious identity. The fact remains that every faith in the world, now we know one of the most pacifist faiths, that is Buddhism, that could also be perverted or weaponized to against minorities in Myanmar. But this has more to do with the colonial identities and populism in every country. For example, in majority of such countries where there have been interesting historical experience, and particularly when you talk about post-colonial societies, there something very funny is going on, that majorities believe that they are under siege. For example, Islamophobia is one word that you will hardly ever hear coming from the minorities in the West, right? Usually Muslim minorities might not be actually too focused on that, but Muslim majorities will be talking about this. Similarly, Hindu phobia is a term that Indian majority has been using, and repeatedly, despite the fact that all over the world, the Hindus are so well integrated into every society and they're welcomed also, but these people keep on using this identity crisis to stoke violence and to stoke hate. And this is what we have seen. In India, the problem becomes bigger because the population is very big, right? Their majority is gradually actually succumbing to the Hindutva propaganda, which actually keeps on telling, blame the minorities, kill the minorities. For example, at Haridwar, which is a religious event and a place, very important place, the videos that have been coming were constantly demanding a genocide, right? Whose genocide against whom? Muslims and minorities. And for what? Why? Because of the cows, right? Again, let me remind everyone who is watching that the cow worship or the protectionism around cow actually comes from Jainism. And Jainism is perhaps even more pacifist than Buddhism. But the way these majorities have actually weaponized it, earlier my brother was talking about Hitler, and at that time I think accidentally he slipped in the Hitler. So the question so far was that we perhaps are looking at Hitler, but is it a Hitler or the Hitler in India becomes a huge problem. And I think that consensus is now developing that what they are honing is the Hitler, not a Hitler.
Right, Shani, when we talk about these factors and try to understand the different layers that exist in terms of what is going on in India or other parts of the world, Do you think that this is something that the common man in India or anywhere can actually understand? When we talk about religious forces, extreme forces, they are perhaps easier to seep into and for things to be black and white, and maybe the kind of layers that need to be understood is something that people may not be willing to or actually cannot really comprehend. Do you think that is the case?
Let's go down to basics. Let's go down to humanity and unite. Just remember about education. Let's remember about stopping corruption. Let's remember about solidarity. And let's remember about what really every religion believing in only one God, La ilaha illallah, and just ordering and asking to people for unity. Let's just remember that we can overcome the ill. We can overcome the corruption by education, by solidarity, by standing together. Of course we can. We have chosen this current government, these current representatives to represent us people. We have chosen them. So let's just remember they are working for us to represent us. Of course we can. We have to remember to stick together. We have to remember for education. We have to remind each other we are here as only one human being, and nobody chosen can come and tell us, implement us their trade agendas, which they are making to control the money and the power or personal gain.
With your permission, Shani, I understand what you're saying, but here's the problem then, here's the question. Why is it that India, which has such a virulent strain of fascism, which is actually acting against the against the minorities, why is it that it is not on the US watch list, or Western watch list of religious intolerance?
This is why whomever controls the trade will control the money. Whomever will control the money will control the world. So it is just as I just previously said, Muslim is the really big majority in the world. So it is not about Muslim or other religions, but it is about Islamophobia. So it is about just standing together. So it is about.
I think Shani,
yes,
Shani, would you agree with me if I say that right now, Pakistan or any other Muslim country concerned about Muslims living in India right now and atrocities being committed against Islam in India right now, should they come up with the idea of another OIC? We had recently had an OIC on the sufferings of Afghanistan, and why can't we have another one? Would you agree with this? Number two, talking about education and talking about the trade. Today I was reading a story about Moradabad. Moradabad is a small city in India. What happened there, that one of the Muslims' shop, all of the Hindus of the area, the Hindutva ideology of the area, they came there and they started obviously vandalizing his shop, and they shut his shop, and then they started requiring him to say the words Jai Shri Ram and all of that. So I was going through this story, and then there was another story of the marginalized communities of India. The students of marginalized communities of India, they were complaining that the single digit score of their PhD is owing to the fact that they belong to marginalized communities of India. So even the PhD students of the Muslim community, of Christian community, of Dalit community, even they are suffering at the hands of the system of India right now. The system of India is actually neglecting its own students' rights right now. What would you say about this?
We are the ones who are making the system. If we just stop becoming the tool of the cunning hands, we will not just allow ourselves easily to be manipulated. Oh, no, I do not accept that. Whomever is just a tool of a cunning hand, it is their problem. They are the problem. We have to think for ourselves. We have to remember why we have chosen these people to serve us, why we have chosen these leaders to serve for us. So if we, coming back to your question, if we are just one of these tools, if we allow ourselves to be used, but you know what? We will end up being losers forever. And they will
Jenny,
gain
something
money
you were
in their
discussing,
pockets.
right? Something you were discussing earlier about the importance of education and that being the way forward in order to change things. But don't you think that education itself is perhaps corrupted and tainted in one particular angle or the other? How do we escape that then?
It's up to us. Today, there are smartphones, internet. We are not in 1920s, are we? We do have educational tools. We have to learn to think for ourselves. We cannot keep allowing people to think for us. We have La ilaha illallah, Muhammadan Rasulullah, or whatever, great God, or whatever we believe in, we respect and we love everybody. It's about humanity. We are brothers and sisters of the world. So let's think for ourselves. We are the decision makers, and education comes with our smartphones, with our books. We learn from the animals. We learn from the dog and a cat on the street.
Right.
Dog
Absolutely.
and a cat on the street.
Absolutely, I understand that, and I understand the kind of individual responsibility that you keep stressing on. But Farrukh, how easy it is for us to separate the two when we have certain things, certain belief systems actually being taught from such a young age, being ingrained within our conditioning, and then we put so much emphasis on reflection and individual responsibility. Do you think that that is fair?
Right, and that is a very deep question. Remember that someone who has actually grown up in this society and in Pakistan, because India and Pakistan actually separated their ways in 1947 in the name of religion. So I could see similar kind of trends in Pakistan as well, right, in our curriculum. So what happens? You actually have to someday break your own code. And how do you do it? Because it is all programming. Critical thinking is the capacity to actually break that code. Now, yesterday when we were talking about, what is going on in India, and I was talking about the two forms of dystopias, right? Huxley versus Orwell. And I said that in India, I see both. I can give you example why that is happening. The way India indoctrination works among the majorities is that you have these WhatsApp groups, and within no time on WhatsApp you start getting propaganda which is basically fake news. About whom? About minorities.
Right.
Someone has killed a cow. Someone has done this to women. I mean, in India's priority list, the first one is, of course, cow. If you want to take offense, the second one is religious structures, and third one then is the women belonging to the majority communities, as long as it is about them wedding somebody outside their faith, right? So this is how it works. But the two other or three other things. So Huxley for the majority, Orwell for the minorities. Because minorities, if they get some boost to their identity, they are going to act out, and India's minorities are not a small number. But earlier, since you were talking about Islamophobia, let me tell you what do I think where Islamophobia stands. I believe, as a person who has studied the history of anti-Semitism, I believe that Islamophobia is a form of anti-Semitism and anti-Christianity as well, because everything goes back to Abraham and Abrahamic faiths. So whosoever is not tolerating Islam is actually essentially not tolerating Judaism either, because that is the origin of all these faiths, right? Monotheistic faiths. So someday these three faiths will have to sit down and find out why is it that propaganda actually uses them against each other, or one by dividing them, they keep on eliminating or exploiting. But finally, and I understand that I'm taking a lot of your time, you have to understand what is going on in India when you look at not education being weaponized, but politics becoming a weapon itself. Why is it that Modi chose these days to withdraw the agricultural reform bills? Because there is going to be an election in Punjab. Similarly, two things have happened that you have to understand in UP. One, if you remember, last time there was COVID, situation and oxygen shortage in India. You found in UP that bodies were being dumped in the rivers, right? So because of that, at this moment, they have tried to do two things. First, they summoned the election commission, chief election commissioner, to the secretary of Narendra Modi, which is totally against the protocol, just to pressure him to make some concessions in UP because their election is coming. Then yesterday, a court, unprompted, without actually focusing on the petition was not even about this, urged the government and election commission to actually delay UP elections, right? So what is happening is, on one side they are trying to create these excuses to delay the elections. On the other, they are once again stoking that religious sentiment against the minorities, because repeatedly in UP that works. And UP is the most populous state. If they lose UP, they lose next elections. So at this moment, they are playing all these games with their own people, and that is sad.
Right. Chenny, where do you think all of this stems from? Can we trace it back to a group of people, to an individual? What can be the origin of this thought that now prevails in India?
Of course, it's the fear of jihad. It's the fear of jihad. India is the third largest country that home for the Muslim community. After all, the Islamic religion and the Muslim goodwill, when the unity comes together, it will certainly come across current India's Modi government's representatives' agenda. So they won't be able to control the world or trade and the money. And while it is happening, the new Middle East project and the new initiative going on with Afghanistan and Pakistan and organization of Turkic countries in up northeast. And it is a kind of a threat that going to stand against India's new global trade agenda. And let's just don't forget about China's Uyghur Muslims. And it is the Belt and Road Initiative, which India is not part of it, but still taking some outside friendship. So it is, when we think about this Pakistan, India, China, and Kashmir matters, which holding its crucial place in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, it is a kind of a threat, and we have to remember, if we just unite, we will just get on and achieve what we want to do. So we have to stop corruption. We have to educate each other, and we have to show a solidarity. So the key to this is corruption, because jihad is the most biggest threat now.
Right, thank you very much, Chenny, for joining us. We're almost out of time for this segment. Thank you very much, Chenny, for being a part of this segment in the debate. Yes, Farrukh.
I just wanted to actually slip in. I respectfully disagree that it is merely the fear of jihad. India has an unfortunate history of being oppressed, right? 1,000 years, the foreigners kept on ruling them, or they thought that foreigners were ruling them. But one state that you have to look at to understand what exactly is going on is Gujarat. In Gujarat, I mean, everything interesting kept on happening there. Somnath Mandir in Gujarat. Mahmud of Ghazna actually came there. Surat, the first East India Company's, factory was also established there. Then Narendra Modi comes from there. Not only that, Gandhi actually came from Gujarat. Qaeda Muhammad Ali Jinnah, whose birthday we are going to celebrate tomorrow, also came from Gujarat. So you'll understand that the historical experience was sometime in the recent past was weaponized against the minorities, and will have to work to actually solve that riddle.
Yeah, and I think they are they have that kind of complex going on within themselves. Psychologically, they are Hindutva ideology has that element in their
identity crisis.
And why? Because they have been for a long time. They have been obviously subject to the Muslims, and this is what it actually haunts them till now, and they want to take a revenge from the Muslims.
Right. Let us also include in the discussion Mr. Salman Siddiqui, who is a Director, Jinnah Institute and a Foreign Affairs expert. Thank you very much, Mr. Salman, for joining us. Before we talk about the situation of the US and Russia talks with regards to Ukraine, I also want to talk about what Vladimir Putin spoke about with reference to Islamophobia, since we were discussing that earlier as well. He made statements with, of course, reference to the conditions that are there in freedom of expression, how they emerge from respect of people around you and not hurting the sentiments or convictions of those that believe differently. How important do you think this was coming from Putin?
I think it's remarkably important coming from Mr. Putin. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
We can.
It's just that Mr. Putin's comments are coming smack after the Democracy Summit that the US held just a couple of days ago. I think one of the points that Mr. Putin wants to rub here is that, America may not be the flag bearer of democracy or in any position to be upholding universal values as it claims to be. It has made that claim over and over again, and I think just that statement coming from Mr. Putin is, is also sort of testament to the fact that they continue to be multiple poles in the world. This is not a unipolar movement, moment as Mr. Biden would like to make it. There are multiple poles. The world is moving towards a new age of alliances, as it were, and in that, new values, new democratic horizons can be established.
Right. Salman, do you think that this comment, especially since we are talking about this identity issue and how Muslims are about Islamophobia as well, do you think that it is going to be heard in the West?
I'm not sure that it's going to register. You see, the whole call for Islamophobia, we do see that it's been made by other leaders as well, including our own. Prime Minister Imran Khan has made that claim repeatedly. We find that it has limited salience in the West. Lawmakers within parliaments abroad in both Europe and the US have been saying this. Islamophobia is not really something that sells as a talking point as much as we would like to make it. I think Mr. Putin is also sort of lending his own credibility or his own voice to this issue as an antithesis to the West. Of course, the West comes with its own laundry list, and Islamophobia is not in that list at all.
Whatever the reason may be, Faisal, do you think it still holds value for us?
It does. It does a huge value of a leader like Putin talking about it. And we already know that in recent times, Putin is someone who is considered as, whether it becomes of making a mosque in Moscow, and that mosque happens to be one of the biggest in his own country. And then we know that President Tayyip Erdogan, when he visited there, he was the one who was actually invited into that mosque, and it was a huge gesture from President Putin. And right now, talking about Islamophobia, of course, he has actually given weightage to what Prime Minister Imran Khan has been talking about. And I think it would have a very good effect on the longer run.
Right. Let's just take a look at exactly what he said before we move on to Ukraine.
believe in Prophet Muhammad. Is this freedom of expression? I believe it is not. I believe it is an attempt to offend the feelings, the close feelings of a person who has his convictions. And if you do that, if you offend people's faith, this leads to further extremism, like what we've seen in Paris with the entire newspaper staff being shot at. So freedom is something that you have on the inside, and freedom must come from respect toward all around you who believe.
Right, of course, you were watching the clip where Putin talked about Islamophobia courtesy RT. And of course, this was an important point that he has made. With reference to the situation in Ukraine, we see that there is movement towards talks between the US and Russia. But then we have statements coming in from Vladimir Putin where he talks about conditions that seem quite impossible for the US to agree upon, with specific reference to NATO and it's rolling back its presence in Eastern Europe. Mr. Salman, when we see that these sort of conditions are being put and then they're pushed with an urgency, we are, of course, going to question whether or not the talks, if they do happen, will even result in something or not.
At this point, it seems very unlikely that they will result in anything. Mr. Biden has said that he will not accept any red lines. And Mr. Putin has said that he would like some guarantees or, some list of incentives produced right now. And given that both leaders have taken a very hard posture on Ukraine, there seems to be leading to a greater conflict. I mean, that can surely be seen in the way Mr. Putin has gamed Europe's very dissimilar views on the US, especially Germany, and how it would like to break out of the European posture, as it were. Everybody is sort of, in a state of recoil after Afghanistan. NATO is still sort of licking its wounds and still trying to find a role. Now, Mr. Putin is also known for his sense of timing, and he has moved exactly at the right time, and knowing fully well that he can strike and he can walk away with parts of Ukraine that he likes. Europe is incapacitated, NATO is in a state of disarray, and the US, well, I mean, Mr. Biden may, as some are saying, be full of hot air, but there is no clear strategy that he has. A talk or two does not really indicate a long-term plan.
Yes.
Right.
Salman,
yes, Faisal.
Salman, knowing the facts, the ground facts, we know that eastern Ukraine, it has obviously majority of the population of the eastern Ukraine, Donetsk I'm talking about. Of course, if we look at the population, they are ethnically Russian and they associate themselves with the Russia. That is why if we talk about the 100,000 troops built up by the Russians, I think it is to the fact that Russia itself has the association with the Ukraine of that in that context. That is why they are there. Could we see if in January or February, whenever they are talking in Geneva, could we see that some sort of agreement would take place in that time, looking at the facts on the ground, because build-up is there from the Russian side as well and from the NATO side as well. So maybe.
Well, certainly, like I said, we are looking at a situation that may become even more volatile. There have been rounds of talks before. There have been agreements before. Minsk in 2014 and 2015, those are agreements that are never followed through on. And as the West is saying, particularly those in NATO, that the build-up in the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, I mean, many of them are saying that Mr. Putin has used that as a proxy, that rebellion is not really a rebellion, it's being manufactured by Moscow. Now, be that as it may, it does give Russia a very clear advantage into the situation right now, into destabilizing Ukraine right now. It has Ukraine on a stranglehold, if you like. And till the West sort of comes together, who is the leader of the West? We were looking at Angela Merkel as the stable, steady leader who had smart things to say, smart foreign policy. We don't see that leadership coming from Europe or NATO or even in the person of Mr. Biden. So while that happens and Geneva is just a couple of weeks away, Mr. Biden will likely have his cake and eat it too, as they say.
Right, Farrukh, when we see the situation, and especially from the Putin side, we see that there is an urgency that he keeps on referring to as well, and he wants immediate sort of action or guarantees from the US and NATO. Why is that?
Right. I think because of the circumstances, because of the factors that were mentioned by Salman Siddiqui and Faisal, these are real issues on the ground as well. And the matters, once again, of identity are important. But if you allow me, I have to actually go back because I kept on sitting and you kept on moving from one aspect to another. First of all, regarding what President Putin said about Islam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, let me tell you that one should not be actually viewing that cynically. I think that is a great statement and we should take it on face value. It is important. It is not only coming after the Democracy Summit, it is also coming after the OIC meeting where the Prime Minister also actually flagged this issue. So it is a very welcome statement. Secondly, the intellectual silos that are created keep on urging you to pick a side, right? As a believer in the Western form of democracy, and I've been very clear about that, I must tell you that we don't have to actually succumb to any kind of tribalism. While you can watch or see Putin through the Western lens, the fact is if you start looking at him from the Russian lens, you will know what a great leader he has been. He was given a country which was badly broken.
True.
There were huge queues and people were dying of hunger when Russia got freedom from USSR. And he was, after Yeltsin, he was the man who actually put everything together and now has brought Russia back to the status of a great power, right? So now what is going on between Ukraine and Russia, between NATO and Russia, should be viewed as a sign, as something that is going on between the Western leaders, particularly the US leader, and the Russian leader. I believe that whether you like it or not, Russia, despite having its Orthodox Christian identity, is now functionally a part of West. And what you see is basically a lover's quarrel or basically a form of haggling that goes on. I don't think that in this age, with the exception of the bullies next door, I'm talking about Indians, I don't think anybody else is in the state of mind where they will willingly go for a world war. So I think that while all this back and forth will continue, I believe in coming days we are going to see some kind of resolution.
True.
And Russia is actually speaking in a language which it knows, and the West actually is refusing to understand that language. But it is going to be essentially some kind of cooperative mechanism, not coercive or fighting mechanism. So I don't think it is going to end up in any kind of deadlock. I think there will be talks and they will keep on incrementally gaining momentum.
Okay, so Salman, does this mean that there is no possibility of military action as well?
No, not at all.
I wouldn't want to. Well, there is a possibility of military action, and the build-up is precisely because of it. But as some have pointed out, that this may be, a dress rehearsal at best. These build-ups have happened before, and I think that the most definitive moment was this. This was back in 2014 when Crimea was created. Of course, that created a whole diplomatic rupture back then. I don't know if Mr. Biden would like a repeat of 2014 right now. I think the stakes are higher in Europe, as all countries in Europe, including France, including Germany as well, have said that in case Ukraine is invaded, the consequences will be disastrous. That includes sanctions, that includes all kinds of things against Russia. I don't think Mr. Biden is would be naive enough to consider such a scenario. I think the entire build-up is really, is some kind of response to Washington's foreign policy in Europe and Eastern Europe in particular. It is also a response in some kind to, what has happened in Syria, as well as Afghanistan. Afghanistan, of course, was NATO's project, not so much Syria, but there was a lot of friction between these powers there. I think also you must look at what's happening in the backdrop of the last quarter of developments. The US has sought partnerships across, Indo-Pacific. While the US is expanding its strategic footprint in new places that create strategic anxiety in capitals across the world, I think Russia is well placed to sort of, get out and secure its interests in its own neighborhood. Be that as it may, I think it will create more anxiety for smaller powers, regional powers like Pakistan, that look to NATO and other multilateral forums for resolving problems like Afghanistan. We must keep in mind that there is distraction in these forums, whether it be the NATO or OSCE or SCO or even the United Nations Security Council. There is distraction and limited ability by the member states to resolve problems. And while that happens, I think Russia will do what it has to, expand its sort of stakes in the region and abroad. And countries like Pakistan must also hold its cards close to its chest.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Salman Siddiqui, for being with us in the show today. Before we end the show, Faisal, moving forward, if we say that the possibility of military action and the possibility of something fruitful coming out of dialogue, both are low, what do you think will happen in the near future? Quickly, the standoff will continue?
Yeah, it will. And what I see in coming future is, I think Eastern Ukraine, of course, it had very long-term ties with the Russians, and them ties are like, they have the cultural ties. They are ethnically, if we talk about them, they are actually Russians. So to me, I think we could see a partition within Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine. It has to go away from Kiev. So Donetsk would be parting its way from Kiev, and this would be the only solution. And I think to some extent, NATO would come to terms with that.
Right. Any second last words, Farrukh?
Right. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think that there is going to be a revision of geography. I think that it can actually lead to some kind of local confrontation. But let us hope it doesn't come to that either. But remember, while I have to actually say that Russia is now progressively Pakistan's ally as well, and we see Russia as that. Ukraine is also our ally.
Exactly.
And we have been importing the engines of Al-Khalid tanks from there. So I think that we shouldn't be actually saying that this is the solution.
All right.
I think that in coming days, this problem will sort itself out, and in coming days, I don't see at least any kind of violence or any kind of continued build-up. It will resolve itself.
Well, that is the hope, and we all hope, of course, as Pakistanis, for peace, for sanity, and for humanity to prevail in all parts of the world. Thank you so much for watching the debate.